Taking a deep breath, Saoirse intertwined her fingers in her lap, fixed her eyes on his face and began. You know of the sickness that has afflicted Peter Morton and how the Reverend and others are attributing it to witchcraft. We had some discussion about this the day Peter fell ill. Aidan nodded. I do. And I hear they've found someone to blame for casting the spell that bewitched the lad. It was hard to keep the sarcasm out of his voice. Aidan had no time for fear-mongering or those who talked of witchcraft. He'd seen it when he fought on the continent and witnessed the consequences, how people used such accusations to rid themselves of those they considered nuisances, or from whom they wished to acquire something, mostly property, and mostly from women. Women who dared to assert authority or challenge those who had it. That this kind of reckoning had come to Pittenweem disturbed him more than he liked to admit. It wasn't the first time practitioners of witchcraft had been found in the town. The last time anyone was declared guilty, and that had been decades ago according to the men in the tavern the night before, the outcome had been catastrophic.
Welcome to the Good Reading Magazine podcast, sponsored by Pantera Press. Good Reading is a monthly magazine dedicated to books and reading and aims to help readers discover their next favourite book. You can find out more about the books discussed on today's podcast at goodreadingmagazine.com.au.
Welcome back to the Good Reading podcast. My name's Emma Harvey. Tasmanian writer Karen Brooks is the best-selling author of 13 books, including historical fiction blockbusters The Brewer's Tale, The Locksmith's Daughter, and The Chocolate Maker's Wife. She has written fantasy novels for children and young adults, as well as several short stories and non-fiction works, and is an award-winning speaker and academic. Karen's latest endeavour is The Darkest Shore, a stunning historical narrative based on the true story of an 18th century witch hunt in a Scottish fishing village. Karen, welcome.
Hi, Emma. Thank you so much.
Karen, as we just heard, you've had quite a diverse and fulfilling career as a writer. But before becoming an author and academic, you were, in fact, an army officer in the Royal Australian Army Survey Corps for 5 years. Is that right?
Yes, that's absolutely right. I was a cartographer.
What was that like?
What was it like? Oh, look, now reflecting back on it, it was an amazing period of time. And I was 19 when I was commissioned after a year's training, and I was from Sydney and I was sent to a little country town in Victoria, Bendigo, not so little now, but I remember being most despondent. I was leaving the city and there I was at 19 years old in a regiment of 300 men and a few women and put in charge of a troop, which is probably about 30 people. They were my responsibility. Plus I was also the most senior female there. So suddenly all these women I was responsible for too. And yeah, it was a sharp, steep learning curve, but I had great men and women there to help me. And yeah, I think some of the skills I learned there, basically time organisation particularly, and being quite disciplined have really served me well in my other jobs too.
Writing 13 books, yeah. And what inspired that jump from army boots to books?
Well, back in those days, you weren't really encouraged to stay in when you had children. And after 5 years, I became pregnant and got married and became pregnant. And you weren't really encouraged to pursue both a career and motherhood. So I left the army, and then I realised I wasn't qualified to do anything, and I also needed stimulation, and I wanted, to give be inspiring and aspirational for my children too. So I went back to university part-time while the children were still little, and then my marriage broke apart, and so I continued to study and found that I loved it so much I never left and became an academic. Did my degree, my honours, and then a PhD.
Yeah, wow. And your latest novel number 13, is that correct?
That's right, Lucky 13. I was actually born on Black Friday, Emma.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and my mother always used to say it was the unluckiest day of the year when I was born.
Yeah. Thanks, Mum.
Yeah.
Well, The Darkest Shore it's an astonishing story set on the coast of Scotland in 1703. And your protagonist, Saoirse McIntyre, is returning home to the fishing village of Pittenweem along the wild east coast. What is it about this wild Scottish landscape that appealed to you?
I think for anyone who's been to Scotland, it's hard not to be drawn into the landscape and the incredibly rich history and mythology of this country. I mean, I had a Scottish grandmother and Scottish step-grandparents too, and I mean, I still find the accent completely beguiling. I'm a sucker for the Gaelic accents, and but going to Scotland and being in situ, I'd already been there once before, but I hadn't been to that area. And I actually was told by some friends here in Hobart who've travelled widely throughout Scotland, and wildly, they're whiskey connoisseurs. That's actually not an incorrect word. That, basically about the fishwives, and they used to be called, well, they were called herring lasses in the 1800s and the early 1900s, and they used to roam up and down not just the East Coast, other parts of Scotland too, and were absolutely essential to the fishing industry, which was one of the main imports and exports, if you like, of the country. And I became quite fascinated by these women, but also by the term fishwife, because it has such negative connotations in our day and age. You know, it's a derogatory term applied to a woman. The more I read about these herring lasses and the fishwives generally, I thought, but they were amazing. They were these bold, courageous, hardworking, defiant, sassy women. And I just was quite taken with them. And then one of my friends that told me the story, Mark Nicholson, he said, you know that they are associated with witchcraft too, don't you? And after that, I was lost. I just thought, there's a story and I'm going to find it. And I mean, we all sort of know about the witch hunts and the witch craze and the terrible, terrible things that happen to women and men throughout the United Kingdom and also across Europe, and even like Salem is a very famous example too, what happened in Salem in Massachusetts. So I knew about witchcraft and witches generally, but what I didn't expect when I actually travelled to Pittenweem and Anstruther and all the beautiful little villages along that east coast was the story I would find. And it's a story that's known but not well known. And I just knew I had to tell it.
Yeah, I certainly hadn't heard of it prior to reading your book. And you mentioned that term fishwife, which, as you say, is nowadays a derogatory term. What does it connote?
Now, I think someone who is a gossip, who's mean, vicious, loud, has to have her own way and quite selfish. I think it's got a lot of negative connotations, argumentative particularly. And
right.
It was lovely to reclaim it. And
Absolutely.
and like I don't write about the herring lasses, which was a term that got applied later. I go back further in time to before these women were called herring lasses and were just fishwives. Yeah.
Right. And it's rooted in that history in which, you know, sharp-minded, independent women were the target of superstitions from the townsfolk and the ecclesiastical authorities, which certainly is the case for Saoirse in your story. I wonder if you can tell us a bit about how in Pittenweem this suspicion spiralled into accusation and then persecution.
Sure. Well, the story, Pittenweem already had a history of finding and burning witches. And in the 100 years before my story's set, I think, and I may have this figure wrong, I can't really recover it from the top of my head, but it was something like a dozen women had been burned on a place called Kilgreen, which is nearby, a field nearby. So it already was there, if you like, in the soil. Well, what happens in this particular instance is a young blacksmith gets into an argument with a friend of the fishwives, a well-known scold, if you like, in the village, but beloved too. And she was so angry with him because he wouldn't give her the nails that she'd ordered to repair part of her house that she erected or made a charm against him. And without spoiling the story too much, he responds to that charm. And what happens there sets up a series of events that are just so terrible and so hard to believe. What happens to a group of women then who become accused of witchcraft and get locked up and tried and, well, actually they don't really get tried, but they undergo some terrible torture to extract confessions. And it's just what happens to the village. It's not just the women, but what what doing, accusing these women and hunting down witches and looking for witches does to this little tiny close-knit village. It tears it apart.
Right. And you would know all too well the ways in which history famously falls short when it comes to recording the lives of women, especially common women or women in trade. I wonder if you came up against any roadblocks while you were doing your research.
That's a wonderful question, Emma. I came up against so many. You're exactly right. You don't get the women's voices. And what I did find, there's been a book written about these events, and it's been researched, but not terribly well, but still, it's still an excellent read. But what I did was I actually went into the parish records and the town records, and they're often contradictory, and they're also quite defensive. So you have always male voices telling you this story, and there are only a couple that sort of defend the women. And there was one man, two accused, but I guess defend the accused and try to put forward their story and talk about it from a different point of view. And so you have to really work hard and go. It's like being an archaeologist, really, and sifting through all these narrative layers to get to some sort of idea of the truth, which of course we know is also a laden term too. But I like to think if I haven't exactly found the truth of the matter, I have a truth.
Right. And is Saoirse, is she based on a real life person, or is she sort of a composite character of the women and the victims of that time?
Yeah, she's a composite character, definitely, but all the other women around her existed. They were real. And I gleaned what I could from the bare bones that I could gather and added flesh to them and gave them, lives, loves, flaws, dialogue, of course, and friendships. Because one thing that was very apparent to me when reading about fishwives, and there's some wonderful interviews that you can find on YouTube, believe it or not, from women now, that are quite elderly, but were fishwives during last century. And what became so clear listening to them, and again, accounts that I did read that were much later, of course, was the close-knit bonds that form between the fishwives, but also within the fishing communities. And I think that's why what happened in Pittenweem particularly really broke my heart, because it was a real effort to destroy the fabric of a community that had done it really hard, but nonetheless had survived. And how they survived this, I don't know, but they did.
Well, yeah, as you said, that you were talking about the flaws and the bonds between these women. And with that dynamic characterisation of Saoirse and the other fishwives, your book it reclaims that word, fishwife, and it gives voice and dimension to these women's stories. Why do you feel that it's so important we hear from those overlooked women of history?
Yeah, well, I think that you can't have an accurate idea of history if you've only got half the story. And, always we've had men's view of history, and we've read about the men in history, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's fabulous. We get a version, an idea, we have a sense of what occurred, but there's always been gaps and omissions and a huge chunk missing. And that's why I love, what in the past has been called, I guess, revisionist history or feminist history, where they're reclaiming these lost voices. And it just gives such a richness and depth when you can examine what happened to both sexes and contrast, compare, but also find that we have much more in common than we do otherwise. And certainly people of particular classes had a lot more in common, if you like, than people of the same sex. So there's those interesting twists and turns that become apparent the more you read. And I think what you also find is that the trials and tribulations that women particularly, but also men of different classes endured, so little's changed, Emma, and it's really quite depressing. Sometimes when you read that, it's that, I don't know how to say it in the French properly, but plus cochon, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And that's one thing I find too. And even with what happened to these women and how there was such a concerted effort to silence them, to silence the truth, to paint them in these dark, terrible colours and make them out to be monsters. We still see that with powerful independent women, how there is concerted effort by certain parties to silence them. And you've got to ask why. What are people so afraid of if they allow these women a platform and a voice? And that was certainly the case in Pittenweem in the early 1700s.
Yeah. And are you conscious of those parallels between then and now as you're writing?
When I'm researching, I do see them, but I don't deliberately try and put them in the book, because I think part of being a writer of historical fiction, you have a responsibility to be true to the period and true to the history to a degree, because of course you still want to tell a really good story, you know. But what I find is, certainly once the first draft's complete and I'm going back over and I'm editing and editing and editing, I think, oh my goodness, or then something crops up on the news, you know, and I think, wow, what century am I living in? You know, is this the 1700s or the 21st century? So, yeah, and I found that with every book I've written. And what I find remarkable about women in trade in particular is there's always this assumption that it's been men alone, I guess, that have upheld trades or passed them on through families and taught them. But again, the more you drill down into history and sift through those layers, you find that women were absolutely integral and essential to trade. And I still found this with my book, The Brewer's Tale, which of course was about a woman in brewing. Women were the industry, in inverted commas, to start with. Women made the ale or the beer all the time, and religious houses. And it wasn't till, as one historian, Judith Bennett, puts it, when a venture prospers, women fade from the scene. So it wasn't till it became a financially really viable industry with the introduction of certain technologies and hops and things like that, that women were pushed out. And the book I'm writing at the moment, weaving plays a big part in it. And it was also true of weaving, that women were pushed out once it became really profitable and of course later mechanised, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you speak of wanting to honour the history and to honour these people and this place. And you're one of many historical fiction writers who love to locate themselves geographically in the place that they're writing about. And as I understand it, you travelled to Scotland, as you were saying earlier, in 2017 with your husband and a couple of friends. What were some of the most memorable moments from that trip?
Oh, gosh, apart from going in and out of all these numerous bars. Yeah, well, two things. And one of them involves Pittenweem, in that we went to the Fisheries Museum in the beautiful village of Anstruther, or Anster, as it's called by the locals. And that's just literally a walk away from Pittenweem, their neighbouring villages. There's about 5 or 6 along that area. And the Fisheries Museum is really well known, and it's wonderful. It gives you this fabulous history of the role that fishing and fishermen and fishwives played in the history of that area. And at the end of we just wandered through ourselves. We spent a few hours in there. And at the end, I was interviewing one of the managers there, and I said something about witches. I said, so I believe that, you know, fishwives and witchcraft were quite closely intertwined. And he looked at me with such disgust, and he said in his beautiful brogue, which I can't do, what a load of rubbish, and I don't know what you're talking about. And I remember I'd gathered a pile of books that I wanted to purchase from their bookshop, and I said, well, if that's the case, why are you selling this book? And it was called The Weem Witch. And he said, he muttered something, and he said, a local wrote it, so I have to sell it. And my husband said, because he didn't, he and my friends weren't actually right beside me. They said they detected tone and they heard the last bit. And apparently I turned to my husband and I had this big grin on my face and I said, oh, he's lying. There's witches here and we're going to find them. And we did. So that's when we walked to Pittenweem, and yeah, we found not just witches, but this amazing, amazing story.
Yeah, and this is quite unlike anything you've ever written before. And you said possibly one of the hardest books that you've ever written. Why is that?
Yes, I think because in the past, whereas I've had real characters in my books, like Sir Francis Walsingham or The Diary of Samuel Pepys, the story itself was a work of fiction, located in historical fact, of course, and with very real occurrences happening. But this time it was inversed. I had real people and a real event. And what I did was create 2 main fictional characters that became, I guess, the vehicle for telling this story. And I guess the reader identifies most closely with them and watches the narrative unfold through their eyes. And yeah, I felt like I had to really honour the story, the real people, And you always, I think, live in fear that somehow you've let them down, and but you don't want to let the reader down either. So you have to hopefully tell a good story and hope people are as moved by it as I was when I first encountered it, and that I've done it justice. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So I feel a level of responsibility with this story that possibly I didn't with my others. And that's not to say, gosh, every writer wants their book to be loved and successful. We don't write for people to dislike our books. But, it is about, a very real awareness that these were real people and real events.
Right, so it's challenging on an emotional level, and it sounds like challenging in terms of the craft and doing something that you hadn't, or writing in a way that you hadn't written before. Did your process change in any way?
Yeah, first of all, can I just say that's a really beautiful way to put it, and I wish I'd said that there, so thank you so much. No, you know what? It didn't change the way I wrote, and I think that's because, as I said, I had two primary fictional characters, so I had to, and because too, in having said that, the real characters that I use, there's so little known about them. So I could just say I knew roughly, I didn't know their ages, a lot of them. I just knew sometimes whether they were married or not. I knew roughly where they lived in the town, and I knew some of the words that they'd uttered in their own defence or what they were accused of, and that was it. So I had to flesh them out. But I always begin my stories with, well, two things, a map and a timeline. So yes, I went there in situ, and breathed in the air and that's Pitt and Weem in the 21st century. So then I had to take myself back. So I get a map as close to representing what the township and the area would have been like at that time. And then I do a very, very accurate timeline. And the events in this book take place, I think it's the shortest time span I've had. It's a year and a bit. And so I was drilling down to weeks and days and months and just trying to get it all completely right. So in that sense, no, the craft didn't change. But yes, the emotional burden probably did.
Right, yeah. And you're speaking of maps, and I think I read somewhere that your love of maps came from when you were an army officer. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much. I became fascinated by them, and also, the skills of early cartographers and geographers. They fascinate me, and I love a good map. I have quite a few in my house and on my walls, and some are very, very old too. And my husband gets most upset because a couple of times I've got a big one of Elizabethan London, and I've unrolled it on the floor, and he's caught me crawling over it with a magnifying glass, and it had a cadenza. But anyway,
amazing. Well, your book, it's an ode to these fishwives and an ode more broadly to the women of history who are underrepresented. And likewise, you dedicate The Darkest Shore to the many wicked women in your own life. What does it mean to be a wicked woman?
Well, the fishwives and I guess witches, women accused of witchcraft were often also termed wicked women. And again, I wanted to reclaim that word because to me it has a lot more positive connotations, because I'm afraid if you can be independent, bold, kind, loving, honest, and a great loyal friend and partner, then and that makes you wicked. Well, yeah, I'm surrounded by wicked women and some men who love their women wicked. And I wouldn't have it any other way. And that's something I learned too, I think, from reading about witchcraft. And I think I would have been friends or been accused probably of being a witch myself. I do have green eyes, so that was one thing. Yeah.
And you are an independent, successful woman.
Well, yeah, I'm certainly independent.
And certainly successful. Well, when you're not immersed in the archives or writing 400-plus page novels, what do you get up to?
I'm an avid reader. I review books a lot, and I have to say I'm just totally blown away by the quality of the stories and the writing, and Australian writers particularly. Gosh, we can stand up and hold our heads high on the world stage. So men and women, just fabulous, fabulous. I've read some wonderful books lately, but I also I've discovered Netflix and Amazon Prime and all those things. I don't know if I'm even allowed to say commercially those things, but yeah, so watching some other amazing visual narratives and just the quality again of the writing and acting. Yeah, I do that, but I walk a lot, travel when possible. I have 3 dogs and 4 cats and a beautiful partner, my husband. So we Oh, and he has a brewery and distillery. I probably should say that. So when I'm not writing, I'm helping him. And our son's our distiller, and it's pretty much 7 days a week. So if I'm not in front of my computer writing or on a chair reading or watching a great show, I can be found pouring a beer or mixing a cocktail.
Yeah. And what's your go-to tipple for when you're writing or dreaming up stories?
Water. I can't
Stay hydrated. Yeah.
I have tried. I remember when I was an academic and teaching Hemingway, and you read about his life and the amount of alcohol he used to down and then write these amazing stories. And I thought, I'll do that too. Oh, no, I didn't. I managed a great hangover and some gibberish, but I can't drink and write. I can have a drink after, and in which case it's probably a gin and tonic or I like my whiskey.
Right, when the work's done. Mm-hmm. And you were speaking about Aussie authors, and Good Reading is a big champion of Aussie authors, and so are our readers. Which books have you read recently that you would recommend?
Oh, look, where do I begin? Well, I can't. It's hard to go past Trent Dalton and Boy Swallows Universe. I've known Trent for years, and I'm just so proud of him and what he's accomplished with that beautiful, beautiful book. I love Kate Forsyth's books, and The Blue Rose is gorgeous. And Kim Wilkins and her fantastic fantasy trilogy that's just embedded again in Nordic myth and legend. And that's, what was the last one called? There's Queens of the Sea was the book 3. So Daughters of the Storm, Sisters of the Fire, and Queens of the Sea, just sensational. Jane Harper's books,
Right.
Dervla McTiernan, just fantastic. Oh, and I'm reading The Anchoress at the moment, which is that Jessie Blackadder? Just fantastic. No, Robin Coldwaller. Sorry, got the wrong one, but Jessie Blackadder's great too. Yeah. So I'm reading that at the moment and really loving it.
Excellent. And you wrote in your acknowledgements that as a result of your trip to Scotland, that many more stories have taken root. Is that a clue about what's upcoming?
Well, yes. I haven't even spoken to my publisher about this yet, but I have an idea. I have an
heard
idea
it here
about
first.
smuggling. Smuggling was huge in those days.
Okay.
And the women played a bigger role in smuggling than I realised. So that's all I'll say. And it might involve whiskey too. Yeah.
Yeah. Very intriguing.
At the moment, I'm writing a book that's based on a character in one of my earlier books who I just fell in love with. And it's called The Mostly True Story of the Wife of Bath. So people encounter the wife of Bath when she's in her 50s in the Brewer's Tale, and she's the madam of a brothel in Southwark. So what I've done is, using Geoffrey Chaucer's poem, of course, as the basis, is I've taken her life from the age of 12 through her 5 marriages and how she becomes the madam of a brothel in Southwark. And, that again fascinates me because marriage was almost like a trade in those days. This is in the 1300s, so I've gone way back in time. And of course, prostitution. And I'm looking at the fine line, I guess, between the two, marriage and prostitution, but also the fact that we only know the wife of Bath's story through Geoffrey Chaucer. Does he use her as a mouthpiece for his own misogynist views? Is it a feminist tract? What's he doing with it? So I thought she can be silent no more. So she is telling her own story rather than allowing a man to tell it for her.
Oh, fascinating.
Oh, I hope so. Thank you.
And Karen, I have one last very important question, and that's that I saw in your social media feed that you have a bit of a thing for novelty mugs.
Yes.
I want to know what your favourite coffee cup phrase is.
I don't think I can say it because it's got a naughty word.
No, go ahead.
Can I?
Yeah.
Okay, it's staring right at me now. I'm looking right at it now.
Yeah.
Because it's ironic, It says, I have a fucking beautiful way with words.
Oh, that's so appropriate.
It just tickled my sense of humour, and my stepmom was absolutely disgusted that I put that up on my social media.
Oh, man.
I watch my mouth around my mum, my lovely mum. So, yeah.
Oh, right. Yes, of course. Well, I think that wraps things up quite nicely, actually. To our readers and listeners, you can get The Darkest Shore by Karen Brooks at the Good Reading website. goodreadingmagazine.com.au, and of course at all good bookstores. Karen, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Emma. It's been a pleasure.